Hello and welcome to Unprofessional Engineering. My name is James.
And you got Luke.
Luke, today we're tackling the history of the railroad industry.
So,
Choo choo. Is that good?
that was terrible. What are you 7?
Yeah, basically.
So again, this is now like the second time this has happened. James is like, "Oh, let's do the history of the railroad." And I was like, "Well, didn't we do like steam engines and like trains or like, some kind of like train technology or something like that?" And he's like, "Yeah, we did, but that's different." And then I forgot, like James is like, he's probably the most history buff person I know. Like you love like the history of anything. You enjoy.
I do love the history.
I
of
imagine you
anything.
have some kind of war tie-in at some point. I guarantee you do.
I do.
But I was like, yeah, real. And then I did a little bit of history, and I started to get bored, so I figured I'd leave most of that for you. So I have some other categories I'm just going to kind of throw in here and there.
I think in my defense for this topic, we did not do locomotives, but we did do model trains, which are very similar, Luke. They're very similar.
I could have swore we did like
Dude, we might
steam
have. We have like
engines.
250 episodes sitting around. We very well could have done steam engines.
Yeah.
Okay. We might have, actually, now that you say it. Okay. History, Luke.
How did it start, James?
Oh, my goodness. It started so long ago in a kingdom far, far away. Most of my history is actually going to be focused on the United States, but England was really
that's where it started.
Yeah,
right?
it was big on starting things, but it's also where we, America, got a lot of our technology, got a lot of our ideas, and really imported a lot of the stuffs that were being built in the greatest Britons and brought it over here. So they were introduced in England in the 17th century as a way of reducing friction in moving like really heavy stuff loaded up with goods, right?
Yeah.
And so even when we're talking about this, we're not talking about the railroad like we think of it today. We're not talking about I jump on the train, I sit down, and we go zooming off somewhere. This was oftentimes just like wooden tracks laid down that had animals pulling carts on them. But this was a way to reduce friction so that they could move more stuff more easily. The first North American gravity road, as they called it. And for those not watching on the YouTubes, if you're not one of our 4 watchers, I just did air quotes on that. It was called the Gravity Road. It was built in 1764, so before we were even a country.
Wow.
For military purposes. And that was at the Niagara Portage in Lewiston, New York. So right up there by Canada, right?
Okay.
The builder was Captain John Montresor, a British engineer and map maker. You're going to find also that a lot of the connections in the early rail industry also had a lot to do with cartography, so making maps, because in America, the East Coast, pretty well defined, right? And even California kind of started doing stuff, but all that like wilderness and frontier in between, nobody knew what was going on. The maps were horrendous. So as we started to expand the rail industry across the country, it also then went hand in hand with developing maps that weren't total garbage.
It's pretty crazy when you think how big the United States is. Like I have conversations with Paul, our friend over in the UK, and he talks about going to visit his mom. And he's like, "Oh, it's all the way across the country," and he's like, "It's like a 6.5-hour drive." I'm like, "What?"
They're like, Pennsylvania? Sure.
Like, are you kidding me? And it's just like when you think of how big the United States is in comparison to like some other countries, it's pretty insane, especially countries in Europe that are like literally as big as like a couple of our states in some cases, and in a lot of cases smaller than a lot of our states. It's just crazy to think how big it is, and that was never documented, and there wasn't a train that went or a plane that could fly back in the day. I mean, that just had to be crazy getting back and forth.
2 things on that, Luke. I've found with my friends in England, and I don't want to say Europe in general, but England especially, going outside of their city or town seems like and it takes an act of God.
Yeah.
Like they have Stonehenge right up the road, and they're like, I've
Never
never
seen it.
been there.
That's
Why would I go
crazy.
there? That's so far away. And you're like, that's like a day trip. What are you talking about? So I think that's really interesting. But a question for you: if you were around back in the times of like the frontier, Lewis and Clark and all that stuff, would you have been one of those guys?
Oh yeah. So
Davy
my
Crockett,
favorite movie of all time is Jeremiah Johnson, Robert Redford, and it is
longtime listener, we found out last episode.
exactly. Yeah, so it's literally one of my most favorite movies of all time. And if you don't know the story,
I don't.
he basically comes to the United States. He just gets out of the military and he decides he's going to be a woodsy guy, a mountain man, and he just decides he's going to do that one day, and he becomes a mountain man. It's an amazing movie, and you should check it out. It's a good movie.
I'm immediately disqualified from being a mountain man because I can't grow a beard. So there's that. Fact. Okay, so settlements of the frontier, I mentioned, big time player in this development. Development of agriculture. It turns out we found out, hey, we got all this great farmland out there in the middle of the country. Let's try and reach that. And then also trying to exploit natural resources, trying to go get natural gas, go get coal, go get other
Mm-hmm.
things, lumber, all sorts of stuff, were big reasons for people trying to get away from the East Coast and move across the country. Privately owned tolls and turnpikes and roads, things like that, were like kind of built, and then steamships were also something, but they can only go by river, right? And we only have so many big riverways that go, and so a lot of what we're going to see is as the railroads got built up, a lot of that was connecting like the ocean to one of the big
A lot
waterways.
of the canals
A lot of
connected
the
right up with, yeah.
Yep, exactly. And so again, this was like bringing goods from other countries or even shipping goods from America to other countries so that it was much easier for them. So in the mid 1820s is when the rail industry in the US is kind of considered to have really started, and its golden age, as they say, was around like 1880 to like the early 1900s. And then pesky things like cars and airplanes showed up and really threw a wrench in the
I
railroad's
have a fun
plans.
fact right around 1896.
Oh, sure.
So it's perhaps considered the greatest feat of the 19th century in America was the creation of the Transcontinental Railroad.
Ooh,
These were two railroads, the Central Pacific starting in San Francisco, and a brand new railroad called the Union Pacific starting in Omaha, Nebraska. They would build one continuous line, and unfortunately, this is a whole bunch of immigrants that built this, primarily Irish
I was
immigrants
gonna
for
say a
the
lot of my
Union.
folks.
Yeah, for the Union Pacific, and Chinese immigrants for the Central Pacific.
Mhm.
They crossed mountains and dug tunnels and laid track, and they met in Promontory, Utah on May 10th, 1896, and they drove in the last golden spike to
Mhm.
complete the railway.
That's pretty good. That's a great story. I don't like the necessarily who was building it, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
When I was reading that, like I remember hearing that in history class and stuff, and it's just kind of like,
Yeah,
well,
it's crazy to think like how like abused some of the immigrants were when they first came here. Like they were literally just brought here to build like the railroads in some cases. It's crazy to think that. So
imagine how disappointed they would have been if they were like, all right, James just got over here from Ireland, go work on the railroad. And I'm like, they'd look at me like, can you even
mhm.
hold a hammer? No. Like, okay, you be the guy that holds the spike. All right. So to go back a smidge from then, the animal powered Lepier, Leiper Railroad, uh, followed in 1810. And it was
Whoa.
like a successful experiment there. But again, this was like horses or whatever pulling a cart on a railway. So Thomas Lepier, was the one who put this together, and it was a railroad that connected Crum Creek to Ridley Creek in Delaware County, Pennsylvania.
Oh.
So our friends over there in Philadelphia, getting this stuff built up first in the United States. So good for you. It was used until 1829 when it was kind of shut down and replaced by a canal. Again, what we're talking about, connecting those waterways, and then reopened and replaced the canal in 1852. And so, why am I going into all of this? information about this stupid little railway. Well, this became the Crum Creek branch of the Baltimore and Philadelphia Railroad, part of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad in
Mm-hmm.
1887. So the B&O Railroad, for any of us Monopoly players, we all know
Yes.
that that's one of the really big famous ones that happened throughout history. 1826, a lot of other lines started around that time. So this one was kind of like an example of how things work. And then they started updating it. So more places were doing this. Delaware and Hudson Canal Company, the Mohawk and Hudson Railroad. It's interesting. You see a lot of Native American influence on the namings as well, especially because of the lands that they were going through
That's
with
where they were
the
stealing the
rails.
land from,
I
correct?
wasn't going to say
Whenever
stealing, but
uh,
yes.
taking for inappropriate amounts of money that weren't enough.
Yes, correct.
I feel like
Trinkets
a
and all
lot
that.
of the westward expansion was at the expense of not only like the
Yeah.
land, but at the expense of the native people here.
Yeah, for
Unfortunately.
sure. Yeah, for sure. South Carolina Canal and Railroad Company, and the main line of the public works between Philly and the Ohio River. So if you look at any of these, you're going to see, like I said, waterways, the gap in between them. How do we get from Hudson to the Ohio or something so that we can
Mm-hmm.
get to the Mississippi? All that stuff. Fun fact
When
for you, Luke.
okay, go ahead.
In December of 1830, the South Carolina Canal and Railroad Company was the first to use steam locomotives regularly, beginning with the Best Friend of Charleston, the first American built locomotive intended for revenue service.
Nice.
Yeah.
So when did uh the train from Back to the Future, what railroad was that on?
I don't remember. That
The
was what, number
dock.
2 or
Yeah,
that was
the
the
dock
cowboy
built.
one, right?
Yeah, he built that train that needed to go 88 miles an hour,
Nobody needs to see
and it
that. I
went
don't know.
off of a thing, and in the future there was tracks there.
Yeah, I got nothing.
You don't like Back to the Future?
The
Just the
first
first one?
one, yeah, but after that, there's no
I
need.
like them all.
Okay, well, I'm glad you do. On that note, Luke, let's take a break for this week's word from our
I have
sponsor.
to assume this is a Baltimore and Ohio, or maybe the Union Pacific, one of these rail companies.
The
Amtrak?
Pittsburgh tea.
Tea.
No, we don't have a sponsor, but we do have a bunch of shout
Oh.
outs. So I love this shout out, Luke. This is for Oscar and his dad, but
Okay.
mostly Oscar. I believe that Oscar might be our youngest listener, which is so cool, but certainly among the youngest. He tells his dad, listen to Talking Podcast to get us turned on, which is awesome. They also bailed on NPR's Wow in the World to listen to us. So take
Nice.
that, NPR. Not only are we coming for, what's his name? Joe
Rogan.
but we're coming for NPR as well. You're on the list.
That works.
So keep on listening, Oscar, and I'm sure you are going to be a better engineer than the two of us
without
in no
a doubt.
time.
Without a doubt.
Kevin P also wrote in, as well as Kevin P's wife, sent me a video of a cool bird beak mask that he got for his wife after Luke's rant about masks the other day. I'm going to keep an eye out for that because it was really cool. I could see me wearing that. And he also has been using AutoCAD at the same company for many, many years now. So double thanks for the support there.
Nice.
And then last but not least, shout out to my friend Chris MG, who also listens to the podcast a lot. He's getting married in May, so congratulations to him there.
How do you get married during a pandemic?
Well, it's going to be outside and all that, but what I really was entertained by is that, he got sent the save the dates or something, and you have the pictures of the happy couple from, I assume, their engagement photos or whatever, but in the bottom corner they had a picture of Justin Timberlake next to the date because it's gonna be May. I know you don't get it, but there's a song, It's Gonna Be Me, but there's like a meme that's like, it's gonna be May. Anyone who is bold enough to put that on their save the date really deserves a shout out.
Okay. Congratulations ahead of time.
Yeah, very excited. Okay, moving on. Once again, scrolling all the way back up in my history file. The B&O Railroad started developing steam locomotives in 1829 with Peter Cooper's Tom Thumb. Apparently, we named our locomotives back in
Yeah,
the
they all
day.
had names.
Do they now? Do you know?
They probably do, but there's so many of them. It's probably like Tom Thumb 84.
Yeah, that makes sense. This was like my passwords, right? This was the first American-built locomotive to run in the U.S. It was intended for demonstration purposes, for steam to pick up traction in the U.S. But it started getting used as well. Up until then, most locomotives were imported from England to help out our railroads. Couple fun facts. The B&O's westward route reached the Ohio River in 1852, the first Eastern Seaboard Railroad to do so. And fun fact number 2, Luke, by 1850, 9,000 miles of railroad lines had been built in the US. That
James, I'm
feels
gonna
like a lot.
I'm gonna break into your history for a second
Please do.
With a section I call Death on Steel.
Oh, how could you not?
These are the 5 most deadliest train accidents in the United States. I'm sure there's ones in other countries, but this is the United States.
Oh
So,
my goodness. Luke.
number 5, the Wellington avalanche disaster, 1910. 96 people were killed, and a 14-foot high piece of snow avalanche fell, hit 2 passenger trains, and it's actually considered one of the most deadly avalanches in history as well at the same time. Number 4, the Eden train wreck, 97 people dead. This happened whenever it was crossing it actually hit another train on a river crossing, and they both fell into the river. 97 people dead. The Ashtabula River Railroad disaster, 98 people dead. December 29th, 1876. This is in Lakeshore, the Lakeshore, Michigan and Southern Railway. 11 cars, 2 locomotives, 197 passengers, and whenever they were going across a bridge, the bridge collapsed. It was only 11 years old. Number 2,
Ooh.
the Great Train Wreck. And when it's called the Great Train Wreck, you know it's bad. The Great Train Wreck of 1918, 101 people died.
Ooh.
And this was whenever 2 trains collided on a 50-mile-an-hour stretch of a road known as Dutch Man's Curve. It's now called Dead Man's Curve.
Is it really?
It is. And the worst one is the Melbourne street wreck. 102 people dead. This is November 1st, 1918. And this was whenever a Brighton Beach-bound train was speeding through a tunnel under Brooklyn's Melbourne Street. And as it approached a curve that was supposed to be taken at 6 miles per hour, a young, untrained engineer went through the curve at 35 miles per hour.
Oof.
And
let's be clear. We're not talking the kind of engineers like us.
No,
we wouldn't do that.
Like, whoo, whoo, and they
There
get
you
to wear
go.
the cool hats.
Yeah,
That's
they
the
do
kind
get
of
to wear.
engineer. But yeah, that was my Death on Steel.
Thanks for bringing us down, Luke.
Sorry.
That was nice.
It gets better.
Oh my goodness. Well, that's good. Okay, moving on with history class. 2 neat things for all of us government lovers and government haters out there. Really neat microcosm of all things the government can do for a society. The first one I would say is good, so don't hate on us. The federal government operated a land grant system between 1855 and 1871, through which new railway companies in the West were given like bajillions of acres,
huge swaths of country,
huge tracts of land, right? And they could sell or pledge to bondholders, whatever, to get investment. A total of 129 million acres were granted to the railroads before the program ended. Implemented by a further 51 million acres granted by states to go along with this by various government subsidies. This program enabled us to open up a bunch of stuff like the Union Pacific Central Pacific, the fast service from San Francisco to Omaha, and then to Chicago and onwards. So the government really played a big role because they saw all of the benefits and great things that connecting our whole country through the rail system would provide. So good job there, government. Fun fact for you, Luke. Railroad companies in the North and Midwest constructed networks that linked nearly every major city in the North and Midwest by 1860.
That's pretty
Very
good.
impressive. Yes.
I have a terrible fact.
Ooh, let's hear it.
Buffalo Bill the Buffalo Bill show had a train wreck. No humans were killed. Over 100 animals were killed.
Oh no!
A part of the Buffalo Bill show, and Buffalo Bill, his horse, Old Pap, died in the collision. And
Pap.
Annie Oakley, pew pew pew. You know Annie Oakley?
Yeah.
She was
Good
a
friend.
headliner in the show. Good friend, longtime listener.
Yeah.
She suffered temporary paralysis as a part of the accident.
Oh goodness. Well, that's terrible. You're just full of doom and gloom today. How about a fun fact number 2 for you before we take another break? In the Corn Belt, so like Ohio to Iowa, over 80% of farms were within 5 miles of a railway.
Oh, you'd have to be back in the day, right?
But I mean, within 5 miles, think how much track is being run to make that happen.
Yeah.
That just blows my mind. Okay, so before we move on, I think it's just time to take a break for this week's Luke's rant.
It is, and my rant is very specifically related to trains. So I've never been on a train, like I don't think ever, like a train. Like I've been on like the
I don't know what a train.
And like trains for like airports going from terminals. I've been on that, but like an actual passenger train to go from like city to city. Never done that before in my life. So this was probably like 12 years ago. Coop, our friend, lives in Philadelphia. He was my boss at the time back in the day. And he's like, oh, why don't you come to Philly for the day? Take the train out, relax, and, take it back next day or that night. And I was like, oh, okay. So he says, whatever you do, get a business ticket. And I was like, okay, because it's only like $35 more and you get to sit in business class on the train from Pittsburgh to Philly. And I didn't realize the difference. So I go to get on the train, and apparently a lot of Amish people travel from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia by train.
Okay.
And I was probably one of the few non-Amish people in the car that I got on.
Interesting. Okay.
And Amish people, I love them. Great food, great furniture, great people, but they don't use antiperspirants.
They don't.
And the car had the most ridiculous body odor that I've ever smelled in my entire life. And some guy comes by and asks for my ticket, and I show him my ticket. He's like, oh, you're supposed to be up in business. I was like,
thank you.
Because it was like a 6-hour train ride to Philadelphia.
Is it really?
So maybe 5.5. It was pretty long. So I move up to the business class train, and it was me and like one other guy. And it's like for $35 more. It was so worth it. But that was my one and only no, I take that back. I took a train from Munich to Austria.
I was going to say,
That's
in
right.
Europe's the only time I've taken a passenger train.
Yeah, I've taken a bunch of passenger trains in Europe now that I say that. In the U.S. Let me restate that. In the U.S., one train to go from city to city.
Yeah, I've never done a train in the U.S.
And there were no body odor problems on the trains in Europe at all.
Good job, Europe. You must not have been with the French. It's fine. That's not nice. This is why we don't have any listeners. My goodness. Okay, moving on, Luke. You said there's going to be a war connection. Oh, and there
there always is for you.
The Civil War. The rail was very strategic for the Civil War here in America, especially for the Union. It used the railways much more efficiently, and it likely had more track laid as well than in the South. But basically, all of the mills and all of the factories and supply centers were all connected and equipped to run via rail. The Union also used blockades to keep the South from getting any new equipment, spare parts, or anything shipped to them via rail. So the war was fought in the South. Union raiders would go and strategically destroy bridges so that trains could no longer go back and forth to support the cities even further in the South. And sometimes they would bend the rails so that even if the train could go, it couldn't pass. Yeah, it would derail, and that would cause a huge problem. So all of this caused all sorts of problems. And by like 1964, 1965, the railroad in the South, like in the Confederate States, had like completely collapsed. So kind of interesting stuff.
Very interesting.
There's a lot more that goes on with all of that if you want to look into it, but we have a lot to cover. Fun fact, Luke. It turns out John Henry, the songs about John Henry,
the railroad,
railroad guy. Perhaps he couldn't outperform a steam-powered rock drilling machine like the songs say, but he was a real person, I found out.
Oh, he was?
Yeah, and he died of lung disease. So, what, not as good. Fun fact, not so fun fact. You ready for this?
Shoot.
Before the Civil War, 8 million buffalo roamed free, but only 4 to 6 million remained after the war because the hides had become very valuable throughout the country, and domestic horses and cattle had begun to occupy that land and take up like their grazing lands. So not only did we steal all this land, but then we killed off half the buffalo just to get the railway
Have
in
you
there.
seen a buffalo close up? Have you
No,
ever?
I have not.
Whenever I was in Yellowstone, I was maybe 35, 50 yards away from a buffalo. They are quite an impressive animal.
I've seen pictures, and I had one on a nickel once, I think. Is it a nickel? Is that where the buffalo is?
I think so, yeah.
I've seen them on the Buffalo Bills helmets.
There you go. Who are
Bill?
in the playoffs.
They are rather impressive this year as
unlike
well.
us.
Wah, wah. Lost to the Browns. Okay, moving on a little bit further. It wasn't all good news for the rail industry. There was the Panic of 1873, which was brought on by a massive like economic depression. A bunch of lines went bankrupt, all bad stuff. The Great Strike began on July 14th in West Virginia. Again, lots of people striking, and labor unrest continued through the 1880s. This involved more than 200,000 people being unhappy with terrible working conditions. Fun fact, by 1880, the nation had 17,800 freight locomotives carrying 23.6 tons of freight and 22,000 passengers by locomotive.
Fun fact for you, longest rail systems in the world? United States, 250,000 kilometers
Holy moly.
of rail systems. Number 2 is China, 100,000 kilometers. And number 3 is Russia with 85,500 kilometers of rails in their system. So the U.S.,
Wow.
obviously, we're one of the biggest countries.
We're not. I mean, land-wise,
well,
though,
land-wise,
we're
but
not.
I think we had way more infrastructure. We had a big head start on China and Russia.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, there's big swaths of Russia that are just big, frozen, barren wastelands of
This is true.
cold and snow.
This is true.
So
that is interesting. Go us. Yeah. So I told you there were two sides of the government story, right?
Shoot.
So they gave us all this land. We built the railroads. It's all super good. It developed our nation. It killed the buffalo. But other than that, it was all good. Then comes our buddy, longtime listener, big time supporter of the show, financial backer, JP Morgan. He played a really big role in the rail system in the late 19th century, made a lot of money off of it, orchestrated the reorganization and the consolidation of a lot of the lines in America. So they were going bankrupt, of course, that's when you scoop them up, right? And put them all together and build this giant, maybe what some people might call a monopoly. So Morgan, Cornelius, I didn't realize that was his name, Vanderbilt, and Jay Gould became really wealthy through railroad ownership. And they created super huge railroad systems like the Grand Trunk Railroad. Fun fact, that is in like Grand Rapids and the Michigan area where Grand Funk Railroad got their name. I said that in another episode.
Nice.
The Southern Pacific and a bunch of these. But in response to this monopoly-like practice that they had going on, the government stepped in and Congress passed the Interstate Commerce Act and created the Interstate Commerce Commission in 1887, where they started to set up regulations for like pricing and setting standard prices of all sorts of stuff. So what did that do? Well, because of that, it kind of hurt the economy, and it kind of hurt the way that the railroads were working. So all of these people who had bought them all up are now being stripped of the power and decision making and being able to pull a profit. And that started to cause the rail industry to collapse once more, which is basically when the golden age stopped for them, is once we put these regulations in place.
Yeah.
Good news for the rail industry. In like 1980s, this stuff got repealed again. So it started to pick up again. Anything else you wanted to chime in there with, Luke, before I finish up?
I got the need The Need for Speed, James.
Oh, I love it. Let's hear the
So,
need for
what do you
speed.
think? So, give me in miles per hour what you think and if you have it, don't cheat. What do you think the fastest train in the world is right now? Guessing miles per hour.
250.
That's pretty good. The fastest train in the world is the Shanghai Maglev,
Okay.
267.8 miles per hour in China.
Wow, that's a
It
lot
is
closer than I'm
crazy.
used to getting.
It accelerates from 0 to that speed in 4 minutes. It
Oh
has
my
no wheels
goodness.
because it's a maglev. And a regular ticket costs about $8 US, which is crazy to me. And a VIP ticket is 16. Second fastest train in the
Wow.
world. Big difference. There's like a 30-mile-an-hour difference. So this is the Harmony CRH 380A goes
Oh, yeah,
200.
that one.
Yeah, of course, goes 236.12 miles per hour. My guess is they care about the 0.12s because it seems to be a bit of a race for who's the fastest. Again, in China.
Okay.
This one leverages what's called a fish head design.
Mm.
Interestingly, all of these bullet trains, if you look at them, they all have these very odd shapes to their head. And there's two. One is fish head and one is crane. And what they did was they studied
Like the bird.
the bird. They studied animals that did really good with diving into the water and doing different things, because what would happen whenever these trains were going through tunnels, in some cases there'd
Mm-hmm.
be these enormous booms, and like because of all the pressure that was building in the tunnels they were passing.
Oh.
And they studied these different fishes and cranes, and they redesigned the shape so they're more aerodynamic, and it reduces all the pressure in the tunnels, and they can travel faster without any issues. The third fastest, this one is in Italy. So this is the fastest one in Europe, 223.6. This one is an eco-friendly design. And the only fun fact I found on this one is it has free Wi-Fi. I was like,
Oh, that's pretty good.
are you
That's a
kidding
nice
me?
offer.
Oh my
I
goodness.
love it. Good job, Italy.
The last thing I have is what I'm calling money, 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 money.
I love these sections that you have.
Yeah. So, third most expensive train ticket in the world. The Royal
Mm.
Scotsman is $2,126 per night. Bananas. This thing is a
What does this
train.
do?
I do not know what it does. Apparently, it comes with a car. I don't know.
Wow.
The next one is the Golden Eagle. This is the Trans-Siberian Express in Russia. This is $2,142 a night. That's number two.
I
Number
feel like
one,
someone needs to sponsor us to ride on one of these.
bananas. Number one, the Maharaja Express in
Oh, yeah,
India,
that's a good one.
$3,385 per night. Now, keep in mind, there's like 45 seats on these things. There's like a 4-star chef like cooking you food. You have your own car, and it's like probably the most luxurious thing you could imagine when you travel this way in India.
My goodness.
So I think we should ask the Maharaja Express to sponsor us. And
No doubt.
oh,
We could do an episode live from the Maharaja Express.
and
Wow.
the last thing I got is, what would it take for James and I to go back to the mothership in San Francisco?
Oh,
And
no.
first of
No
all,
interest, Luke.
I know
No
it
interest.
takes 3 days to get there by train. You got to get on 3 separate
Oh, my
trains.
gosh.
If you did coach, it's only $197 a pop, but you'll have to deal with a whole bunch of body
All the
odor.
smelly people, yeah.
You could also get your own sleeper car for $775 for the round trip,
Or just
or,
fly,
or just fly.
mostly. Wow, that's
That's
crazy.
all I got.
I love it. Just a couple more things from me. Since we've now left the golden age of trains, I'm going to skip any of the other stuff. It's mostly depressing, a few war tie ins, but it's really very sad. And then in the 80s, the rail industry starts to come back. Railroads today, though, fun fact, although not really used for like the business of moving people back and forth so much anymore, approximately 70% of the miles that Amtrak runs are owned by freight railroads, and they charge a fee to Amtrak then to use
Oh,
their
okay.
tracks. So I thought that was interesting. But future trends is one thing that I did want to talk about.
Let's hear it.
We have so many tracks, it's not going away, right? One thing that we're looking at is increased industry consolidation. So less and less small lines, more and more one big company. Also, digitalization, just like everything, right? Becoming digitalized is really big for the rail industry. You can track the trains more accurately, where they are on the tracks, avoiding problems, avoiding disasters, as well as better understanding like loading for freight and what's on each train. Basically, they're looking to get to a point where you can virtually watch the train cross the country if that's what
Oh,
you're
that's interesting.
into. A big push in APAC. So for the Asia Pacific region, they're investing tons of money. China alone just approved a $15.7 billion project for urban railway projects in one of their northern capital provinces. So just that one area has like $16 billion getting sunk into
Wow.
it. Brexit also plays a big factor in this. So railways that generated passenger revenue of 8.8 billion pounds pounds in like the 2014-2015 timeframe that year, owned like a large amount of immigration and tourist travel from the or to the UK from the European Union. And the number of travelers has gotten knocked down big time because of Brexit. And so they're
Oh.
losing tons of money on the rail industry now.
Oh, I could see that.
And then the last one, of course, how could we go an episode without mentioning the Hyperloop?
How could we not
Uh,
mention the Hyperloop?
and your buddy,
Elon, friend of the
Elon,
show.
long time listener, big time supporter. He's putting that one in Las Vegas. It sounds like it's a little bit of a disappointment right now. I think he's doing some in California as well. The Virgin Hyperloop already has demonstrated with riders its technology in like a 500-meter test site in Las Vegas. And they expect to continue to do more and more of this. I'm really interested in the Hyperloop. I hope it works out. I know there's a lot of haters out there. Check out our episode on the Hyperloop if you haven't already, as well as the Boring Company episode. But yeah, I could see that being a way of the future.
Yeah, the thing that I'm surprised never happened, speaking like future, is how come they never designed like a technology or like a vehicle that could take advantage of the existing rail systems to travel, like that were smaller. Think of like a bus. Like imagine if a bus could just get on a
A
train
rail.
track,
And that's kind of what they're doing, right?
drive there, and then if a train's coming, it could get out of the way and get back on the track and keep going. And
Hmm.
because like right now it's these big long trains and it's really difficult. And I'm not saying like let individual users like me or you like drive a car on a train track, because I think that would be dumb. But I would think if you did smaller, more like smaller transportation, like under 20 passenger kind of thing,
Sure.
leveraging rail systems, and have more of that, and just kind of make really good coordination. I think that could be an interesting angle.
I think so too. And I think that's what Elon has proposed at times, to just pull your little Tesla off the road. It goes down onto the tracks and then it
Yeah.
shoots you off where you're going. So that could be interesting. All right. So I know we're over time. If any of you want to talk about the rail industry, have any topics for us to discuss, just want to shout out, maybe get some amazing stickers. We haven't mentioned those in a while. Email us at unprofessionalengineering@gmail.com. And until next time.
See ya.